It's all
The
right,
Alpha
easy
King's
now.
pup bit the human's sleeve.
No one will hurt
The
you.
room fell silent, but she tugged back with a smile. Moonlight spilled across the stone courtyards, turning each shadow into a restless figure. Within the castle walls, life was both rigid and strange, a mixture of whispered secrets, hidden glances, and unspeakable rules. Tonight, the castle held a rare gathering, a hall filled with nobles, diplomats, and curious onlookers. But at the center of this assembly was not a lord or lady, but a young human girl, Ilara, who had arrived under mysterious circumstances. Ilara's steps echoed as she entered the grand hall, her simple gown brushing against the polished marble floor. The crowd's murmurs died to a cautious silence. Eyes, wide and wary, followed her, yet her gaze never faltered. She had been told stories of the Alpha King, Kale, ruler of the wolf-blooded dynasty, who could command both loyalty and fear with a single glance. Yet she felt no fear, only curiosity. There was something magnetic in the way the hall was structured, how the shadows seemed to cling to the corners, and how the moonlight danced across the high windows. Kale sat upon his throne at the far end, an imposing figure wrapped in dark silks, crowned with the authority of generations. His amber eyes scanned the hall and fell upon her. A ripple of acknowledgement passed through the room, the sort of presence that could silence even the boldest voices. Ilara's heart beat not with fear, but with a strange thrill, like standing at the edge of a storm that promised both danger and wonder. Among the nobles sat his wolf-blooded kin, men and women whose features held the subtle marks of their dual nature. But beside Kale, a smaller, wilder presence moved with restless energy. A young wolf shifter, no older than a child by human standards, but with the sharpness of one much older, prowled along the edges of the hall. He was Kale's pup, Riven, whose amber eyes mirrored his father's, yet shone with mischief and curiosity. As the nobles whispered about the girl, Riven's attention was fully captured by her. He crept closer, silent as a shadow, and before anyone could notice, his teeth gently nipped her sleeve. A startled gasp escaped from the gathered crowd. The hall froze in an instant silence, eyes wide with shock. No human had dared such boldness. No human had been allowed to interact with the pup so freely. Yet Ilara did not retreat. Instead, she looked down at the tiny mark on her sleeve and smiled, tugging it lightly. Her eyes sparkled with a daring challenge, and a ripple of whispers moved through the hall. The nobles shifted uneasily, unsure whether to admire her courage or fear its consequences. Kale's gaze sharpened. He leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable, as if the pup's action and her response had revealed something deeper. For a moment, it was not the girl before him but a puzzle, a force that stirred a curiosity he rarely allowed himself. "Bold," Kale said, his voice smooth yet edged with authority. "Not many would dare provoke my pup." Ilara straightened, meeting his gaze steadily. "I did not provoke," she said softly, her tone even though her pulse quickened. "I merely responded." A murmur ran through the crowd. Boldness, wit, and subtle defiance were dangerous in Kale's presence. Yet something about her words lingered in the room, like the faint scent of a storm yet to come. Riven, sensing his father's tension, tilted his head. The small wolf pup seemed fascinated by Ilara, sniffing at her sleeve again, then backing away as if unsure of his own bravery. She knelt slightly, allowing him to approach, and he brushed his fur against her hand. The movement was small, simple, yet it carried the weight of something more. Kale's lips curved slightly, though the expression vanished almost as soon as it appeared. His thoughts were a storm behind amber eyes. Who was this human girl who could move through his hall without fear? Who could face his wolf-blooded kin without trembling? And why did his heart tighten with a strange, unnameable tension? The hall remained quiet, the nobles hesitant to speak, sensing the fragile balance of this moment. Finally, Kale's voice rang out, calm but commanding. "Let the girl remain here tonight," he said. "She will be under my protection." Alara's pulse leapt, but she did not show it. "I thank you, your majesty," she said, her voice steady despite the rush of emotions within. "Call me Kale," he said quietly, almost a murmur. No one else in the hall could hear it, but to Alara it carried weight. A human's voice, however careful, could not hide the sharp edge of respect and defiance entwined in her tone. Kale studied her, the tension between them crackling like a thin thread straining against a storm. As the evening continued, Alara found herself seated near the grand fireplace. The room was lavish, adorned with tapestries depicting battles of long ago, portraits of wolf-blooded ancestors, and dark, intricate carvings of wolves and kings. Yet despite the grandeur, a chill lingered, a reminder that the castle was alive with secrets. Riven never left her side, circling and occasionally brushing against her as she moved. The nobles regarded this with suspicion, some whispering of omens and curses, others simply of propriety. But Alara paid them little mind. Her attention was drawn instead to the throne at the end of the hall, where Kale watched her, his presence commanding, yet restrained. Hours passed, filled with quiet tension. Kale did not speak to her again, yet each glance they shared felt heavy with meaning. The human girl had not merely entered his castle, she had stepped into a world of shadows, ancient curses, and unspoken power. And in doing so, she had stirred something within him, something he thought long buried beneath duty and centuries of isolation. Eventually, the gathering began to disperse, nobles murmuring excuses as they departed, leaving the hall and its occupants to the quiet of night. Alara remained seated by the fireplace, Riven curling near her feet. She watched Kale rise from his throne, his movements graceful yet full of authority, and walk toward the far end of the hall. He paused, his amber eyes catching the flickering light of the fire. "Do you understand what it means to be here, human?" he asked, his voice low but carrying across the empty hall. Alara met his gaze without fear. "I understand enough," she said softly, "and I will learn the rest." Kale's expression was unreadable. He turned slightly, as though weighing the truth in her words against the weight of centuries of tradition. For a moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of wolves from the forest beyond the castle walls. "You may stay," he said finally, a shadow of a smile tugging at his lips. "But understand this. The castle is not kind, and neither am I. Do not mistake survival for welcome." Alara inclined her head, accepting the challenge. "I do not intend to." As Kale left the hall, the shadows seemed to bend around him, following his movements with a silent, watchful presence. Riven padded closer to Alara, nuzzling her hand once more, as if affirming that she had survived the first test. The human girl, alone in the vast hall now, felt a thrill of excitement, tempered by the knowledge that nothing here was ordinary and that every step forward would carry risk. Night deepened. The moonlight shifted, casting long, shifting shadows across the walls. And in those shadows, Kale's figure lingered near the hall's entrance, pausing to look back at Alara. A tension hummed in the air, delicate, dangerous, and electric. For Alara, the bite of a small wolf pup had changed everything. The hall was no longer just a gathering place of nobles. It was a stage, a web, and she had stepped onto it with courage and wit. The Alpha King, who had watched centuries pass with detached authority, had noticed her. And that notice was far more dangerous than any whispered rumor or threat from the castle's many corridors. As she settled near the fire, Riven finally curled at her feet, eyes drooping but still alert. She whispered softly, "I suppose we'll be companions for the night." The small wolf stirred, then seemed to settle, a silent acknowledgement of a bond that neither entirely understood. Outside, the wind carried whispers from the forest, shadows brushing against the castle walls. Within the hall, silence settled like a soft, taut curtain, holding the tension of promises, challenges, and dangers yet to come. And somewhere in the quiet corridors and moonlit towers, Kale watched, waiting, wondering, and perhaps already anticipating the ways this human girl would change everything. The night was far from over, and the castle, with its history, secrets, and silent magic, was only beginning to reveal its truths. The castle slept under a heavy, silvered moon, yet silence did not bring peace. Within the stone walls, shadows moved as if alive, curling along corridors and peering from the corners. Elara had spent her first night at Kale's castle awake with questions, her mind swirling with the events of the grand hall. The bite of the young wolf pup, Riven, had left more than a mark on her sleeve. It had left a spark of curiosity she could not extinguish. Morning came with a chill that seeped through the massive windows. The corridors were empty, save for the soft steps of servants and the quiet stirrings of wolf-blooded guards. Elara wrapped herself in a cloak and wandered the hallways, feeling the pulse of the castle as if it were a living thing. She knew that every corner held secrets, some whispered by the walls themselves, some carried in the silent glances of those who had spent lifetimes under Kale's rule. Riven padded beside her, his small body moving with cautious grace. The pup had seemed wary last night, but now he appeared protective, as though sensing the girl's curiosity could either lead her into danger or reveal truths long hidden. Elara reached down to stroke his fur, and he pressed against her hand, soft warmth radiating like a quiet promise. Her steps eventually brought her to a small, ivy-clad courtyard. Moonlight still lingered in pools along the stone floor, and the air smelled of frost and damp earth. She knelt to touch a flower that had somehow bloomed despite the chill, marveling at its delicate petals. Yet even in this quiet corner, the castle's secrets began to stir. A low hum echoed faintly from the walls, almost imperceptible, but it carried a weight that prickled her skin. It was the sound of history, of magic, of curses that had lingered through generations. Elara froze, feeling the hum vibrate through the stones beneath her fingers. She had heard whispers from the servants about the Alpha King's bloodline, that it was strong, ancient, and bound to powers that could neither be tamed nor fully understood. And now she felt it for herself, a tugging at her very soul. "Riven," she whispered, "what is this place hiding?" The pup's ears twitched, and he looked toward the distant towers, where shadows moved in ways that did not belong to the morning light. Then, as if understanding her unease, Riven padded closer, circling her protectively. Elara felt a strange warmth in that simple gesture, a reminder that despite the unknown, she was not entirely alone. It was then that Kale appeared. He emerged from the shadows of a long corridor, his dark cloak flowing, eyes glowing with the same amber intensity that had captured her attention in the hall. There was a weight to his presence, the kind that silenced the air without a word. "You should not wander alone," he said, voice low but carrying the authority of someone who had seen centuries pass. "I am not afraid," Elara replied, standing tall despite the thrill of tension curling in her chest. "And I wish to understand this place, to understand you." Kale studied her, his expression unreadable, as though weighing the risk of her curiosity against the rules that had bound him for generations. "Curiosity can be dangerous in this castle," he said finally. "Some truths are not meant to be uncovered by human hands." Alara's gaze did not waver. "And yet," she said softly, "some truths are worth the risk." For a long moment Kale said nothing, his amber eyes tracking her every movement. Then he turned and gestured toward a narrow corridor that led deeper into the castle's heart. "If you wish to see, you must follow," he said. "But do not falter, and do not trust the castle too easily." She followed, Riven padding close, silent but alert. The walls seemed to grow darker as they walked, the torches flickering in a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. Strange carvings lined the hall, wolves, moons, and symbols that she did not understand. The closer they moved toward the castle's center, the heavier the air felt, as if the stones themselves were laden with memory. Finally, they reached a doorway, partially hidden by shadows. Kale paused, resting a hand on the frame. Beyond this door lies what has haunted my bloodline for centuries, he said quietly. A curse older than any king who has sat upon my throne. Alara swallowed. A curse, she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kale nodded. The power that flows through my veins comes at a price. It is tied to the land, the castle, and to every life under my rule. It is a burden I cannot escape, and one that has claimed those closest to me in the past. The door opened silently, revealing a chamber bathed in pale, ethereal light. The walls were etched with runes that pulsed faintly, and at the center lay a stone pedestal holding an object that seemed to hum with quiet energy, a pendant, glowing softly like captured moonlight. Alara, Kale said, his voice low and careful, do not touch it unless you are certain you understand what it is. One touch can awaken forces that you cannot control. But curiosity, that spark that had brought her into Kale's world, could not be contained. She reached out, her fingers brushing the pendant's surface. A warmth spread through her hand, up her arm, and into her chest, as if the object recognized her touch. Her breath caught, and she looked up at Kale. His amber eyes widened, a mixture of recognition and something deeper, something that made his usually unreadable expression falter. You feel it, he murmured, voice tense. I do, Alara whispered. It is like it is alive. Kale stepped closer, his presence overwhelming yet grounding. It is alive, he admitted. It carries the history of my bloodline, every curse, every choice, every life lost or spared. And now it has chosen to respond to you. Alara's heart raced. The weight of the castle, the bloodline, and the centuries of hidden power pressed against her, yet she did not pull away. Instead, she felt a strange, growing connection to Kale, a thread of understanding, of shared destiny that neither could ignore. Riven nudged her hand, breaking the intensity of the moment with the simple, grounding touch of the small wolf. Alara smiled, pressing a finger lightly against the pup's fur. I suppose I am not entirely alone, she said softly. No, Kale said, his voice nearly a whisper. You are not. For the rest of the morning, Kale led her through parts of the castle that few humans had ever seen. Secret chambers, libraries filled with dusty tomes, and halls echoing with the soft hum of magic. Alara listened and watched, absorbing every detail, every flicker of shadow, every subtle motion. The castle was alive, but it was also lonely, and Kale carried that loneliness like armor, until now. As they walked, Kale began to speak more freely, revealing glimpses of his past. He spoke of ancestors who had wielded the wolf blood with both honor and cruelty, of battles fought to protect the lands and the people, and of the constant vigilance required to prevent the curse from consuming everything he held dear. Alara listened, her mind weaving together the history with the quiet, subtle cues she had observed. She felt a deep compassion for Kale, tempered with fascination. He was a king, a warrior, a guardian, and yet beneath it all he was still human in ways that mattered most. He carried fear, regret, and the desire to protect those he loved. By afternoon, they arrived at the castle's rooftop terrace, where the sun shone weakly through drifting clouds. From this height, the forest stretched endlessly, dark and untamed, hiding secrets that had existed long before Kale's dynasty. Riven padded at their feet, ears twitching at distant sounds. Kale stood beside her, his cloak catching the wind. You feel the curse too, he said quietly. Even from here, the forest, the castle, and the land itself speak to you. I do, Alara said. It is like a song I did not know I remembered. Kale's expression softened slightly, a rare break in his usually stern demeanor. Perhaps, he said, you are more connected to this world than I first believed, but the curse is patient. It waits and it tests. And not all who are tested survive. Alara's gaze did not falter. Then I will not fail, she said. Kale studied her, a storm of emotion behind amber eyes. Something within him shifted, a mixture of admiration, worry, and an unfamiliar stir of hope. For centuries he had been alone, bound by the weight of his bloodline. And now this human girl, fearless and determined, had stepped into his world, and into his heart. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, shadows stretched across the terrace, blending with the forest beyond. A howl echoed faintly far off but carrying through the trees. Riven stiffened, ears alert. Kale's gaze darkened, his jaw tightening. "The curse is stirring," he said, voice low and tense. "And it knows you are here." Alara swallowed, a thrill of fear and anticipation coiling in her chest. She looked up at Kale, whose presence was both a shield and a warning. "Then we face it together," she said. For a moment they simply stood in silence, the wind carrying the distant sound of the forest, the whispers of the castle, and the faint, almost imperceptible pull of the ancient magic that bound them all. And then, without warning, the pendant on the pedestal deep within the castle glowed brighter, a pulse of light that reached toward them even from afar. Ilara felt its warmth ripple through her once more, stronger this time, as if the castle itself had acknowledged her presence. Kale's eyes widened, his usual control shaken. "It has chosen," he whispered, "and now so has fate." The night was coming, heavy with shadows and the promise of trials. And in that moment, Ilara knew that the castle, the curse, and the Alpha King's world had entwined with her own in ways that would change both their lives forever. Outside, the forest whispered, shadows danced, and the bond between human and wolf, girl and king, began to take root, delicate, dangerous, and utterly irresistible. The blood moon rose slowly over the castle, casting a deep crimson glow across the towers and courtyards. Its light spilled through the tall windows of Kale's throne room, painting the walls in shades of fire and shadow. The air was thick with tension, charged with magic and ancient curses that seemed to stir as the moon climbed higher. Alara stood near the center of the room, her cloak brushing the polished floor, and Riven padded restlessly around her feet. Kale entered the throne room from the shadows, his presence commanding every inch of the space. The blood-red light made his amber eyes burn like molten gold, a striking contrast against the dark waves of his hair. He paused near the dais, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You have seen more than most humans ever do," Kale said, his voice low, smooth, and edged with authority. "And yet you continue to wander into places you do not fully understand." "I do not fear the unknown," Alara replied softly, her gaze unwavering. "I fear only standing aside while it passes me by." Kale's jaw tightened. Her words carried courage, but they also carried the weight of challenge. He had been tested in countless ways, by rivals, by war, by the curse that haunted his bloodline. But never had a human, especially a human girl, stood before him with such quiet defiance. "You should not speak so boldly in the presence of your alpha," he said. "I speak as myself," Ilara said. "I am not here to please anyone but to survive and to learn." A flicker of emotion crossed Kale's face, something he rarely allowed to show. Pride, intrigue, a trace of worry. He stepped closer, each movement fluid and deliberate, and the space between them seemed charged with invisible tension. "The blood moon brings change," Kale murmured, almost to himself. "It stirs what has slept for centuries, and tonight it tests all who walk these halls." Alara felt the pulse of the castle beneath her feet, the walls vibrating softly as if the stone itself were aware of the danger approaching. The air thickened, carrying whispers that seemed to drift from the very shadows. "What is happening?" she asked, her voice a mixture of curiosity and unease. Kale's gaze sharpened. "The curse grows stronger with the blood moon. It tests loyalty, strength, and heart. Some will falter, some will be consumed." Alara swallowed, feeling the weight of his words. The knowledge that she had entered a world ruled by both magic and bloodlines pressed upon her chest, yet fear was tempered by fascination. She had come this far, and she would not turn away now. Suddenly, the torches along the walls flickered violently, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. Riven growled low in his throat, ears pinned against his head. Alara felt the hair on her arms rise as an unseen presence brushed past them, a cold wind whispering through the hall despite the closed windows. "The curse knows you are here," Kale said, his voice hardening. "It senses your presence, your choices, your bond with me. And it does not forgive easily." Alara stepped closer to him, her heart pounding. "Then we face it together," she said, and in her tone there was no hesitation, only resolve. Kale studied her, amber eyes narrowing as he measured her courage. He had faced countless enemies, walked paths lined with betrayal, and yet the defiance and determination in her eyes stirred something ancient and forbidden within him. For a fleeting moment, he saw not a human girl, but a partner, someone capable of standing by his side in the shadow of the curse. A sudden rumble shook the floor beneath their feet, and the shadows along the walls twisted unnaturally. The very air seemed alive, thick with dark energy. From the corners of the room, a massive wolf-shaped shadow emerged, its eyes glowing like coals. The creature was immense, ethereal yet tangible, a manifestation of the curse that had haunted Kale's bloodline for centuries. Alara instinctively stepped back, but Kale's hand caught her arm, grounding her. "Do not fear," he said, his voice firm but calm. "Fear feeds the curse. Control your heart or it will control you." Riven barked sharply, running toward the shadow, but Kale held him back with a swift gesture. "Stay," he commanded. The pup whined softly, pressing close to Alara instead. The shadow wolf circled them, its movements fluid and menacing, yet purposeful. It was not merely an animal. It was the essence of the curse, ancient magic shaped into a predator that hunted not for food but for fear. Its eyes locked onto Kale, then shifted to Alara, sensing the bond that had begun to form between human and wolf blood. Kale took a slow, deliberate step forward. "It tests me," he said, more to himself than to her. "And it tests you." Alara felt a strange energy stirring within her, a resonance with the pendant she had touched days before. She closed her eyes, focusing on the warmth it had given her, and the light seemed to pulse in response. Her heartbeat synced with the rhythm of the castle, the blood moon, and the shadow wolf itself. When she opened her eyes, Kale nodded slightly. "It responds to you," he murmured. "Do not underestimate your own strength." Alara's hands clenched, and she took a step forward, facing the shadow. "I am not afraid," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "We will not fall." The shadow wolf lunged, moving with unnatural speed. Kale reacted instantly, shifting fluidly into his wolf-blooded form, powerful and agile. His movements were precise, a combination of raw strength and centuries of training. Alara followed, guided by instinct and the strange connection she felt to the pendant. Together, they faced the shadow, their movements a dance of tension, trust, and silent communication. The creature struck, its attacks swift and unpredictable, yet Kale's skill and Alara's determination allowed them to anticipate its patterns. Each strike, each step, bound them closer together, weaving a bond forged in danger and necessity. Despite the chaos, Alara felt something within her shift. Fear was replaced by focus, uncertainty by clarity. She realized that this was not merely a test of strength, it was a test of heart, of trust, and of courage. The bond she felt with Kale, the connection with Riven, and the resonance with the castle's magic were all pieces of the same puzzle. And together, they could face the curse. The shadow wolf paused, as if sensing their unity, then reared back, eyes blazing with a deeper, more sinister glow. It lunged again, faster, more ferocious, and the room trembled under its power. Kale met it head-on, teeth bared, claws striking, yet even he struggled against its relentless force. Alara stepped forward, raising her hands instinctively toward the creature. She felt the pendant pulse against her chest, warmth radiating outward. A beam of light, soft but bright, shot from it, connecting with the shadow wolf. The creature recoiled, its form flickering like smoke in the wind. Kale's gaze met hers, wide with shock and something else, admiration, awe, and perhaps a hint of fear. You control it, he whispered, barely audible over the sound of the wind and shadows. Alara's voice was firm. Not control, balance. We are not enemies, we are together. It tests us, yes, but together we can endure. The shadow wolf froze, eyes burning, then slowly retreated into the farthest corners of the room, its form dissipating into wisps of dark energy. The hall grew quiet once more, except for the ragged breathing of Kale and the soft padding of Riven. Kale shifted back into his human form, his cloak falling around him like liquid darkness. He approached Alara, each step careful, as if weighing the fragile trust between them. "You have done what few could," he said, voice low and intense. "And yet the curse is not gone. It will return stronger, more cunning, more relentless, and it will test everything we are." Alara met his gaze steadily. "Then we will be ready, together." For a long moment neither moved, the tension between them thick and unspoken. Then Kale's hand brushed against hers, an almost imperceptible touch, yet it carried the weight of centuries of restraint and longing. His amber eyes searched hers, a storm of emotion hidden behind a mask of authority. "You are not like the others," he murmured, voice roughened by emotions he seldom allowed himself to feel. "You are dangerous." "And you are not like the others either," she replied softly, a small, daring smile on her lips. "Yet here we are, standing together." Riven nudged her hand, breaking the moment with innocent mischief. She laughed softly, a sound that seemed to echo through the throne room and lighten the shadows. Kale allowed a faint smile to tug at his lips, though the weight of the blood moon and the curse remained heavy upon them. Outside the castle, the forest stirred, whispers of unseen creatures riding the wind. Within the walls, Kale and Alara stood side by side, two figures bound by courage, magic, and a bond that neither fully understood but could not ignore. And as the blood moon reached its zenith, a distant howl echoed through the night, a reminder that the curse was patient, relentless, and far from defeated. Alara looked at Kale, her heart steady despite the tension. "Whatever comes next," she said softly, "we face it together." Kale's eyes softened slightly, the amber fire dimming into a warmth reserved for no one else. "Together," he echoed, and for a moment the weight of centuries seemed lighter, carried not alone but shared. But beyond the walls in the shadowed forest, a new movement stirred, one that watched, waited, and would not be denied. The curse had retreated, but it had learned. And when it returned, the trial would be far more dangerous, testing not just strength, but heart, loyalty, and the fragile bond that had begun to grow between Alpha King and human girl. The night held its breath, the blood moon glowing high above, and the dance of shadows was far from over. The night was thick with shadow, and the wind whispered secrets through the twisted branches of the forest surrounding Kale's castle. The blood moon had faded, leaving only a dim silver glow that cast the castle in a spectral light. Inside the walls, the tension of the past nights lingered like smoke, a reminder that the curse had not yet been defeated. Alara stood at the castle's edge, the stone battlements beneath her feet cold and unforgiving. Riven padded close, ears twitching, his small body alert to every sound. Across the courtyard, Kale moved with quiet intensity, his cloak sweeping the ground as he prepared for what he knew would be the final trial. The air was thick with anticipation, charged with magic, history, and the unspoken bond that had grown between them. "The curse grows restless," Kale said, his amber eyes scanning the horizon. "It knows we are ready. It knows we are united." Alara nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She had spent days learning the rhythms of the castle, the resonance of the pendant, and the subtle language of the wolf-blooded guards. But no preparation could match the rising storm outside the walls. The forest, alive with shadows, stirred with anticipation, carrying whispers of the ancient power that had haunted Kale's bloodline for centuries. Riven let out a low growl, a warning that sent a shiver down Alara's spine. She glanced toward the trees, and the shadows shifted unnaturally. The curse, in its true form, had arrived. From the forest, a massive wolf-shaped spirit emerged, taller than any living creature, with fur as dark as the night and eyes that burned like embers. Its presence alone made the ground tremble, and the air vibrated with ancient, untamed energy. The curse was not a creature of flesh. It was a manifestation of centuries of anger, fear, and unfulfilled power. Kale stepped forward, his movements precise and fluid, every step measured. "Stay close," he commanded softly, his voice carrying both authority and care. "Do not falter. Trust the bond we share." Alara's heart pounded, but she did not step back. She had learned much in these days. That courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to face it. "I trust you," she said, her voice steady despite the chill crawling up her spine. "And I trust myself." The wolf spirit growled, a sound that echoed through the forest and castle walls alike. It lunged with supernatural speed, its massive paws tearing into the stone as it approached. Kale met its attack, shifting into his wolf-blooded form, powerful and agile. His movements were a blur, a combination of strength and centuries of instinct, but even he struggled against the sheer force of the cursed spirit. Alara closed her eyes, focusing on the warmth of the pendant against her chest. The magic she had felt before pulsed stronger now, connecting her to the castle, to Kale, and to the spirit itself. She raised her hands, letting the energy flow outward, a soft light radiating from her fingertips. The wolf spirit paused, its glowing eyes fixed on her. "You are not alone," Kale shouted, voice carrying over the roar of the wind. "Together, we are stronger than it is." Alara opened her eyes and stepped forward. "We face you not as enemies but as equals." Her voice carried a power that startled even her, a resonance that seemed to reach into the wolf spirit's mind. The creature recoiled, its form flickering, unsure of how to respond. Kale moved with precision, circling the spirit, striking when it lunged, deflecting its attacks while keeping Alara protected. Their movements were a dance, synchronized in instinct and trust, a combination of human courage and wolf-blooded power. Riven leaped between them, small but fierce, biting at the edges of the shadow in bursts of daring energy. Though only a pup, his presence reminded both Kale and Alara that strength was not measured by size alone, but by loyalty and courage. The battle raged across the battlements, the cursed wolf spirit relentless in its attacks. Yet something had shifted. The spirit hesitated, as if feeling the bond that had grown between human and king, between girl and wolf, between courage and love. "Alara," Kale said, panting but steady, "the pendant, it can bind it if we combine our power, but you must lead it with your heart." Alara felt the warmth of the pendant surge. She had trusted Kale before, but now she understood that trust was only part of the equation. Her courage, her compassion, her willingness to face the curse without fear was what would guide the power. She stepped forward, hand raised, voice steady. "I do not hate you nor fear you. I see your pain, your purpose, your loneliness. You are part of this world, and so are we. Together, we end this curse." The spirit faltered, shadows trembling as her words and the pendant's light intertwined. Kale stepped close, placing his hands over hers, and their combined energy surged outward. Light and shadow collided, twisting and dancing, forming a vortex that drew the spirit toward the center of the battlements. The wolf spirit howled, a sound that shook the stones and echoed across the forest. Yet Alara's determination did not waver. She focused on the truth of their bond, on the trust they had built, on the courage that had carried them this far. Kale's amber eyes met hers, filled with admiration and something deeper, a silent promise unspoken. "We can do this," he murmured. "Together." With a final surge, light enveloped the spirit. It let out one last, piercing howl before dissipating into a flurry of shadows that scattered into the night. The battlements fell silent, save for the wind and the soft, exhausted breaths of those who had fought. Alara sank to her knees, Riven curling beside her, his small body shaking with fatigue. Kale knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. His touch was grounding, comforting, yet it carried a weight of emotion she could not yet name. "You are remarkable," he said quietly, his voice almost vulnerable. "Few could have faced it, let alone guided its energy." Alara smiled faintly, her chest heaving. "I had help," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "We did this together." For the first time, Kale allowed a small, genuine smile to tug at his lips. The tension that had defined him for centuries seemed to ease, if only slightly. He had been burdened by the curse, by his duty, by solitude. But now, with her by his side, a sense of redemption flickered within him. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the forest and the faint rustle of leaves. Alara rose to her feet, brushing stone dust from her gown. She looked out over the battlements, toward the forest that had once seemed menacing and now seemed alive with quiet energy, almost protective. Kale stood beside her, the moonlight glinting off his dark hair. "The curse is broken," he said softly, though he knew it was not fully gone. "But its power has been tempered, and we have survived it together." Alara felt a strange warmth bloom in her chest, a sense of completion mixed with anticipation. She had faced fear, magic, and shadows, and had emerged not just unscathed, but stronger, connected, and changed. Riven barked softly, nuzzling her hand, reminding her that bonds formed in battle were as strong as those formed in peace. She smiled, looking at Kale, who stood slightly apart yet close enough to feel the electricity in the space between them. "Kale," she began, voice soft. "What now?" Kale looked at her, amber eyes reflecting moonlight and unspoken emotion. "Now," he said slowly, "we begin the life we choose, not bound by fear, not ruled by curses, but together, if you wish it." Alara stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "I do," she said simply, "and I am ready to face whatever comes as long as we face it together." Kale's hand found hers, fingers intertwining. A warmth spread between them, a connection that carried relief, trust, and something deeper, an unspoken promise that neither would face the future alone. They turned together toward the horizon, where the first hints of dawn began to pale the sky. The forest below seemed calmer, as if acknowledging the end of the trial. Riven leaped to the edge of the battlement, howling softly, a call that was part warning, part celebration, and part affirmation of the bond that now existed between human and wolf, girl and king. Kale placed a protective hand over her shoulder. "The world beyond this castle is vast, dangerous, and full of choices," he said. "But whatever comes, you and I, we face it as one." Alara nodded, feeling a surge of courage and hope. She had entered the castle as a stranger, untested and unaware of the power she could wield. Now she stood not only as a survivor but as a partner, a companion, and a force that could challenge even the oldest curses. Together, they walked back toward the castle, Riven bounding ahead, shadows and light dancing around them. Behind them the battlements were quiet, the curse laid to rest, and the dawn slowly lighting the sky. The journey was far from over, but the bond forged in fire and shadow, in fear and courage, would guide them through whatever lay ahead. As the castle stirred with the quiet hum of life returning, Kale and Alara stood at the threshold of a new beginning. The world was uncertain, the forest full of mystery, and the castle alive with secrets. But they faced it together, transformed by their trials, strengthened by their bond, and ready to embrace whatever came next. The howl of the wind and the distant echo of wolves in the forest were no longer warnings. They were a song of freedom, of hope, and of redemption. And somewhere in the shadows, Riven barked again, playful and fearless, a reminder that even in a world of curses and power, there was joy, companionship, and the promise of adventure still to come. The curse had been faced, the shadows had been confronted, and the Alpha King and the human girl, bonded by courage, trust, and unspoken love, stood ready to face a future of their own choosing.